they aluminum or steel or?
Carbon fiber.
It has reached 4:30 on a beautiful sunny afternoon here on Cape Cod on June 5th. If all are in agreement, I'm going to call this meeting to order. Thank you all for being here. We have many people. Jonathan has put his application in to replace one of our most esteemed colleagues. No, your voice has been great.
Yes.
You okay? A lot of us sit here and have our past behind us, but few of us are out in the field gathering data every day, which I know that you're doing.
Yes.
And so when you speak up over the last several months of my short tenure so far, I listen.
Thank you.
Because I think you're out there with boots on the ground, and I will miss you. I don't know if anybody else on the board will miss you. Will you miss her?
I will definitely miss the reasoned voice and
Talking
analysis
about.
that Jordan brings to the table every time she speaks. It's, okay, there's an important perspective. And, you know, I've only been on the board for a year, and I've learned a tremendous amount from everybody, and you in particular, and, you know, how to listen and vocalize opinions. And, yes, I'll certainly miss you.
Thank you.
And I will now reveal something about her.
Uh-oh.
She's actually a classical musician.
I know,
Yes.
right? Shocking.
Yes, no. So if you ever get a chance to catch her playing the violin, it's pretty amazing. So
Thank you. very
thank you
much.
for serving. I understand you're taking a little step back. I hope you pay attention.
Yes, I think I'll probably,
When
be
see
in the
agenda,
audience.
when you see the agenda and you
Yeah.
feel it's something important, we'd love to have your voice in the audience. And now with that, I'm going to transition if I can. So Jonathan, who's been sitting in here for several meetings, Jonathan, stand up. Jonathan has put his application in. And we don't know who will or won't take your place. Jonathan, you're going to have some very, very big shoes to fill. I hope you're ready. Okay. With that, we're sort of waiting for somebody from the tech center to show up.
I see Brian.
It's right here.
Brian's coming in here. But I'm going to do a little pontificating here or whatever. So I'm sorry I didn't make the last meeting where we talked about a little bit about what other communities are doing around, setting up geo districts and everything else, and what the triggers are for how people have to convert to IAs. But we are at the point for this committee where I'm trying to direct everybody along the way to try to ascertain for each of our estuaries, not just individual estuaries or just arbitrary estuaries, what we need to do in terms of IAs and sewers to be able to define where we go. I've reached out to the Board of Health and talked to them about this. One of the things I need is to find a volunteer, and if not me, somebody else, to make their next meeting and begin over the next several weeks when they meet over the next, between now and September. I have a target in my mind that by the fall, we will have made enough progress to be able to start between the Board of Health and this board, explain to the selectmen and others where boundaries for IAs should be and where the triggers are going to be for converting to IAs, okay? So there's two aspects to that. One is somebody keeping the Board of Health informed until we get to a joint meeting of what we're thinking about or what we're doing. And then the other one is tomorrow night will be the first meeting of the pond committee. the pond committee has similar related interests to us.
I've already made a commitment to be there to Kim.
Okay, so what I'm looking for is a volunteer, and if there are no volunteers, I'll fill the role. But I would love somebody to, sort of over the next couple of months, be willing to go to the Board of Health as a regular agenda item and tell them.
I'd be happy to do that, Steve.
Okay, all right, thank you, John. And Tom,
Yeah,
you're
I'm
willing
planning on
to
going
do the
to,
pond
so.
thing. Tell them where we're at, because I think as we march through the end of the summer and into the fall, what we'd like to do is be able to go before the Board of Selectmen with a plan that is based a little bit upon math, science, and not just, I mean, I've heard 300 feet back from the edge of the water, this is that. That might be a good start, but Kristen has been tasked to start taking the estuaries and look at, for each estuary, what it means in terms of nitrogen reduction, whether it's the 17 or the 12 or the 19 or whatever. How many homes would have to be in there with some, what I would call safety factor, whether it's 20% or 15%, I don't know. And so tonight we're going to hear from the tech center a little bit more about what it means once you start creating these zones and implementing these zones to manage and monitor these zones and how you pay for that work, I guess, a little bit. I don't know if I'm being ambitious or I'm being slow, but I would love to be able, in the early fall, to have the Board of Health, the Pond Coalition, and this board at some level of consensus, not unanimity necessarily, but consensus, to go in and talk to the selectmen about where we're at. One of the interesting things, and Paul is here tonight, is there's currently a bylaw in town that says if you've got a subdivision over a certain number of houses, you have to put IAs in. I think as we evolve this, we're going to need to change that bylaw as well. And Paul has graciously agreed to help me understand the nuances of bylaws for that. So with the concurrence of this board, if it's okay for John to be our representative to the Board of Health, to pass on what we're doing, I would accept that. I don't think I need a formal vote because I didn't put it on the agenda right now. And if this board feels comfortable to have Tom cover the pond, that would also be good. And I would ask you to put it on the agenda for our next meeting to so formally designate that. The pond committee is meeting in the civil defense room downstairs tomorrow night.
The fallout shelter.
Interestingly, it's not an official meeting because they did not know how to post an agenda yet.
Oh.
They're still learning how to do it. So they're sort of going to get down there and do kumbaya, I think.
Okay.
All right? Okay. Gentlemen.
Hello. Oops, I didn't realize I'm moving it.
Well, good evening.
With that beard, you're going to wind up on the front page of the Enterprise.
Am I?
You are. You are.
Reporter is getting your picture now.
That's great. You know, do you do Santa Claus?
I don't do Santa Claus, but I could. I'm willing to do, I would be willing to do that. The beard is not really it's more of a recent thing.
Can't be that recent.
No, I'm thinking,
It's not a year, so it's not that long.
but it's a current event.
It is. Well, thank you for having us. Yeah, I'm David Iorio Izzo. I'm the program manager for the septic utility program.
Brian Baumgartl, you've seen me a number of times. I'm going to let David mostly talk this evening, and I'm here to help contribute where I can. So I'm going to let David run through his
Sure.
his program.
All right. So, a quote that is something that the test center and the SUP that something that we kind of live by is do unto those downstream as you would have those upstream do unto you. And really, the way we look at this is, the water quality issues that we have on the Cape. The solutions to those issues really involve every single person. No matter where we live on the Cape, we all have a responsibility to the Cape and to the residents right now, but also to the future residents. So it's something that we always try to keep in mind when we're doing tests at the test center, and also when we thought about the RME when it was just a concept. So what is an RME? Because the septic utility program is in fact a RME. It's the responsible management entity is what that stands for. And we recently changed the name to septic utility program because we felt it gave a better description of what we truly are. But in and of itself, we are an RME. And an RME can function like a sewer utility, but it manages residential innovative alternative septic systems instead of sewers. It also ensures that IA systems operate efficiently, safeguarding public health and, of course, the environment. Our mission as a SUP really is dedicated to the stewardship of IA systems and also supporting Cape Cod communities in achieving what their goals are for water quality, and then, of course, public health objectives when it pertains to water quality and the septic systems. So, in theory, what can the RME do? What can the SUP do? And that diagram really shows every aspect that the septic utility program can be involved in. And so I've kind of broken it down on the left into three categories to kind of summarize what all those images show. And so it's really, we can oversee every facet of an IA's life cycle. So from permitting to installation, we can ensure that systems are meeting regulatory and environmental standards. When it comes to operation and monitoring, the continuous oversight to really guarantee systems are functioning at their best level. And if they need any type of tweaking, that can be done as soon as possible. And then, of course, long-term care, so providing maintenance and support to extend the system's life and effectiveness. And before I get more into what I just spoke about, what that kind of looks like in the real world, I'll just give you some updates that have happened to the SUP. Number one is we changed our name. We changed it from RME to Septic Utility Program, and that's something that kind of became official today. So you'll start seeing that rebranding more with our new logo as well. We've been partnering with towns. So we are planning support. It's in various different stages with different towns. But we have gotten to with certain towns, we've gotten to the point where now we really are putting together a plan of what they really need to utilize us for. That's one thing that really, I think the SUP is unique in, that the services we provide really depend on what the towns need. It doesn't have to be identical to other towns because every town really does have a different need to a certain extent. So we can really tailor it. Another big aspect that we've been spearheading is the recommended technology panel that we had put together. So I believe it was last year, we put together a panel of experts in the field that are not affiliated with any technology. A lot of them, Mass DEP, it's also professors, individuals that really have a lot of experience when it comes to the IA technology and septic systems. And what our ask of them was to really come up with a list of technologies that could be given to towns so that they could see what kind of technologies they want to put into the ground. Mass DEP eventually is going to release their list of best available technology. Their list is based on 10 milliliters per liter of effectiveness. Our list will probably be a little bit broader than that because depending on a town's watershed plan, they may not need a system to necessarily be doing, be that efficient at what it's doing. They may be able to have a system that gets 11 milligrams per liter or gets 15. It really depends on the individual plan. So we want to give the information to the town so they have a resource that they can look at these systems and really see how they have worked compared to other systems. And we'll also have some technologies of systems that are not currently widespread used within Massachusetts, but are used in other locations like Suffolk County in New York. We are also rebuilding the IA database that many of the towns use. We're in phase 2, we call it, and we're just trying to make that database easier to use. And have features where operators can use it on mobile devices. So the first rollout will be to operators. Then we'll do the admin side for us. And then the third phase will be the phase to the towns. So we're really trying to create a database that is also easier to use and has more information and readily accessible. Sampling, we've been doing quite a bit of sampling for third parties. Non-for-profits, and also for the creators of various septic systems. So we've been going out, we've been sampling, we've been inspecting, really as that neutral third party. Our interest is really that these systems are going to work the way they said they were going to work, and if they're not, getting that information to the necessary individuals so that those systems can be really worked on and tweaked so they can go back to performing the way they should perform. In the works, we are also in the process of coming up with a cost calculator for homeowners and towns, and that can project the cost for not only IA systems, but also for sewers and long term. So not just the first year, but also going out for multiple years and seeing what that cost would look like. We're also planning a second meeting with contractors to speak with them, find out the obstacles and the opportunities that they have, and also, again, to kind of help them understand what their relationship would be with us. And then a decision makers workshop is something that we're also working on. In fact, there is the coastal, next week, the coastal, Cape Coastal Conference. If that's something that you are not going to, I would say it's free, and it's going to be a great opportunity to really listen to a lot of individuals concerning this topic. We'll be there, and a great opportunity. So in this section, I really want to talk about, what can a SUP actually do for a town, right? And the first area is really cost distribution and regulatory compliance. So something that we've been seeing in our other division, which is the Aqua Fund, is really there has been an increase in cost when it comes to installation. And there could be many factors for that. It could be that installers really have a lot on their plate, and they charge more money for installations, right? Kind of supply and demand type of thought process. Also, when they're looking to install a system, they're looking at one system to install. So the SUP can coordinate and manage multiple IA system installations through a competitive bidding process. So maybe it's within a town, but it also could be regional. And so in that theory, hopefully when we're going out to bid, we're not just bidding for one installation, we're bidding for multiple, and that can drive down the cost for each individual system. Instead of an individual homeowner navigating the procurement process alone, we can pull resources and solicit bids for multiple installations simultaneously. And lastly, not only are we looking to drive down the cost, but also we want to ensure that the consistency and quality and adherence to regulatory standards are there as well. Operation and management. of systems. How can we help there? Again, we can offer a comprehensive solution for ongoing operation and management of IA systems. By bidding for operators to oversee a series of systems, again, we can streamline the administrative tasks for homeowners and operators. So instead of an operator having to have contracts with individual homeowners, they could theoretically have a contract with the SUP, and then the SUP can go and I'm sure the homeowners can have a contract with the SUP, and the SUP can then outsource that to individual operators. So the operators are really just going to one entity for payment, and that would be the SUP. And then unbiased third-party oversight, which is something that we are actively doing now. And again, we act as an impartial third party, doing the sampling and the inspecting and verifying that the system is performing and that there is regulatory compliance, that systems are being sampled and inspected as they should, based on the technology and at what level that technology is, if it's provisional or if it's general use, and then making sure they're being inspected also on a timely manner, I should say. And really what this does, it instills confidence, right, not only to the residents, but to the regulatory agencies, and it also fosters transparency and accountability. I put together a sample of what a SUP, the SUP scope could look like. This is something that you definitely can look through, and what I did is I basically looked at every aspect of a IA system, even before installation, and what that looks like from how can the SUP be involved in that, and how can it help truly a town. So ultimately, and I mentioned this a little bit before when I was speaking about the quote that we have, but ultimately, how we look at it at the test center and at the SUP is we're just a piece of the puzzle. We're not the solution for the total issue that we have at hand. It really takes a broader strategy to have a solution. So sewers, IAs, eco-sanitation, bogs, wetlands, and then I put question marks because we don't know what future technology is going to come. And that's something that we also are very actively looking at, not only at the test center, but also at the SUP to see what are those future technologies that are happening here in Massachusetts, but maybe it's happening somewhere else, right? So we're always interested in seeing what else is out there to help towns and help them with their watershed plan. So ultimately, that's truly why the SUP was created. The SUP was created to really help towns. We're just another resource out there for you. We know that, towns have limited resources. You have limited staff. We're just another resource that can help the process, really streamline the installations, help to hopefully drive down the costs. Because right now, those costs on the surface would fall to the homeowner. And it's really expensive. Sewers tend to have more of a funding resource tied to them, whereas unless a homeowner is going through Aquafund and the tax credits, that's really all that's really helping the homeowner to pay for it. And ultimately, they pay for the entire thing. So we're also looking to see how can we streamline the cost of these systems, and then the oversight, which is very important because we want these systems to last as long as possible and to perform exactly the way they were intended to perform and to get the numbers that a watershed plan needs and for the reason why that town chose those systems to go in. And that is it. Any questions?
So my first question, David,
Yep.
is we usually ask people to identify who they are, where they're from.
Oh, sure.
And why they're standing at the microphone, and I forgot to ask you at the
Sure.
beginning. You got a short introduction, but
Right. So as I mentioned, I'm the program manager for the SUP. Where my background, so prior to that, for 4 years, I was in public health. I worked for Arizona and I worked for Vermont. in infectious diseases, managing both of their projects for that. So obviously COVID was the primary one, but I also did monkeypox and Ebola. Prior to that, I was worked for New York State in homeless housing and creating new permanent and temporary housing for the homeless communities across New York State. And then prior to that,
You've made the cutoff, thank you. I'm going to start with Mike, just a couple of sort of overview comments, and then we're going to let the board members ask you a few questions. The audience will get to ask questions. My perspective on this is, on the front end, how that works for people who have to do the installations. I don't quite see how that works here. But on the other side of folks having to regularly monitor how their systems are working, they would have to spend a few $100s a year to get sampling done and delivered to somebody else. And I think the model that I've seen talks about somehow or other, I mean, there's a lot of work to be done to do that. You create an entity that says, you're on an IA system and you pay the town a certain amount each year, and then the town or the town through a third party then collects and monitors the stuff on your system. You know, I'm sitting here thinking, and I have a number between 2,000 and 4,000 IA systems that have to go in the near future. Near future being within my lifetime or shortly thereafter. So the backside of it, you know, building an entity and a system to charge people for being on an IA and being part of the solution has some elegance for me, okay? That's all I'm gonna say. I'll put their hand up first. Tom put his hand up before you.
Okay.
Okay?
Why is the program limited to residential systems?
Ooh.
that's a good question. I'm not, I don't have the, I don't know about the creation. I wasn't here for the creation of it. I think for the management of it, most of the watershed plans that we're seeing affect residential. It's not to say that we couldn't have oversight on systems that were, you know, for business use. There's not really a huge difference between the two. They just probably would be larger. You know, a lot of times we'll see multiple systems going in for a business. So we say residential because I think that's kind of what we look at in larger numbers.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that economies of scale and everything else, you would go after some low-hanging fruit, whether it's a school or a restaurant or the YMCA here in town that's gonna be built in the next couple of years, and be gearing up to figure out what approach is gonna work for these bigger things, because it's just, in my way of thinking, it's the same technology, you just need to
Right.
scale things up.
Exactly.
Have it on a more rigid monitoring.
And I think, and again, the SUP is extremely flexible, and we're here to help the town. So if a town wants us to focus on businesses, we can, because it really is, theoretically, it's the same thing. To your point, it's just upscaled to be larger.
But you weren't excluding businesses. You just
We're
used
not.
the word residential.
We're not excluding.
You done?
Yeah, I'm done. Steve, I guess, was next in line.
Got 4 questions. First, you're from the Mass Test Center or a different part of Barnstable County?
So the Mass Test Center and myself are both part of the wastewater division.
Of the county?
Of the county. Brian is director, so he's the director of that center, and also,
So do we look at you as a vendor or a regulator or a little bit of both?
And he's usually not this friendly.
Right.
I would say not, I mean, I think a little bit of both. You know, we're the county after, you know, at the end of it, we're part of the county. So can we be a vendor and function as one? Yes, when it comes to sampling. I mean, we're doing that already. Oversight as well, right? So if we're giving oversight to those that are doing the installation and the operation and maintenance, then that way we are acting as an oversight. In addition to that, one of the other things that was not on the slideshow, but should have been, is we're also looking in the long term to also be educational. You know, we want to set up programs where we can have operators come in and installers, and we can educate them on these new systems and, you know, what is the proper way to install them, what is the proper way of the operation and maintenance of them as well. So that is also another aspect that the RME is looking to do as well.
Let me phrase it in a less sophisticated way. Do we have to pay you, and do we have to do what you say?
So, good questions, and definitely phrased in a way that, you know, I could definitely answer that. So yes, we do get paid. You know, we're right now, we have, we started with grant funds because obviously we need to get started somehow. So all of our funding came at the beginning through grants. We do get paid, like for the sampling that we do get paid for that. And then as far as do you have to listen to what we say, we don't have any type of enforcement aspect to us, right? So just like pretty much the rest of the county, we don't have an enforcement aspect. So I can't force someone to do something. That really is based on the town. So what we would do is if we're going out and we're sampling and we're finding that a system is not operating the way that it's supposed to operate, we would let both the town know and also whoever created that system, whoever has the operation and maintenance contract on that system, we would let them know that and say, you know, look, this is what we're finding. But at the end of the day, we couldn't force someone to do something.
All right, the next question is, would you foresee extending your services to cover urine diversion toilets?
That could very well be, that could very well happen. And that's something that Brian and I have also talked about.
Okay. And you mentioned group purchases of IAs or mass collective purchasing to reduce prices and so on.
Right.
I could see, there are two ways I know of to do that.
Mm-hmm.
One is you wait till a bunch of people all want something and you get together and you
Mm-hmm.
solicit bids. The other is more what the federal government does with GSA, and fortunately I never had to deal with that.
Right.
And the federal government does it badly, but they do it on a humongous scale.
Right, right.
Of getting products registered as GSA certified, so that then any agency within the government that wants a ballpoint pen or a desk chair or something can look in a catalog and get something that's been pre-negotiated.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously it would be ridiculous for everyone to wait till there was enough to make an order for 500,000 ballpoint pens.
Right.
Which of those two modes are you thinking of doing?
I'm going to interject if I
Okay,
can.
sure.
I can. So the town has some experience with this already. So when Mara Vista was being put together, they decided that there were going to be these low-pressure sewers that.
Oh, yeah,
and it
but I want
can't-
to see what
No,
he wants
no,
to
I
do.
know, I'm just going to try to help you here a little bit, because it was put out to bid, and then the low bidder for the systems was obligated then to supply the system. So, at least in my world, okay, Steve, of this, so first off, there's a state procurement list, which is like the GSA list or whatever. At least the way I see it is when we start getting into the hard, like hundreds of these having to go in every year or every 2 years, the town would, in my world again, put a bid out to get a preferred vendor, so we don't get 30 different people, and then that would,
Right, but he was
you would put it in
implying
there.
that you were going to do this countywide.
So,
That's what you bring to the party that we can't do ourselves.
right, so what I was saying was, if, one of the things that the sub could do is if a town is going out to bid right? And they're going to look for someone to install an IA system. You may have a certain number that you're doing at any certain time. It depends on your regulations, right? What is going to trigger the new IA system going in? So if it's being done on an individual level, the cost is going to be higher because it's going to be based on what does the installer, what does their schedule look like, what's their pricing. When you can price out more of the same item, when you're going to install and saying, I have 10 systems that need to go in, I have 50 systems that need to go in, whatever that number may be, you can bid for a price that will be lower for each specific system. So while a town can do that, like if you decided that you wanted your regulations to be in a phased approach, so you're saying this one area, similar to a sewer, we're going to do by area. Well, then you could go out and say, I have this one neighborhood, I'm going to need 20 systems. What's your price? And you could do that. But if you don't have that approach, then the only way to try to get put multiple systems going in, right, to one installer would be if you did it on more of a regional. I wouldn't say a total county, but let's say a regional. And that a town may not be able to do because you'd have to coordinate with another town. But as the SUP, we could try to coordinate that instead.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to hope that you would do, that somehow set up a pre-negotiated price so that the towns and the individuals can buy them whenever they want to. And what's in it for the vendor, of course, is like being a Medicare-listed pharmaceutical. It's all, the negotiations all taken care of. They get free advertising.
I think
And-
that's something that.
You have a fourth question?
Department, potentially, we would have to have some conversations with them. Oh, sorry. Yeah, through county purchasing, so the county has set up a number of contracts that the towns are able to avail themselves of for various things. I mean, they've negotiated with WB Mason as an example, so the towns don't all have to go out and get individual bids for, office supplies. I think there could be some potential to utilize that route, like we provide a tradesperson list, where they've already gone through a process of, submitting all the necessary paperwork for prevailing wage, et cetera, so that they're sort of, ready to work for contracting purposes. I think there could be some opportunity there. I think that's a really good point with respect to, how can we help some of the individual towns. So, it's something that I hadn't really put a lot of thought into, but I'm glad you brought it up.
And one last question.
Colombo.
I need the trench coat.
I'll get you one.
Okay. Will there be, can you be useful as far as bringing new IA technology in from, as you mentioned, Suffolk County, from a vendor who hasn't specialized in Massachusetts, but could with help from you and the towns? Because eventually we're going to need some competition at the high performance end of IAs. There's really only one or two vendors now. There are two vendors and one of them is questionable. And you need two. You need Boeing and Airbus, or else it's bad news for the airlines.
So that's something that Mass DC has really been engaged in. Prior to my time, that's something that George Hoyfelder had always done, which is to identify those technologies and encourage them to come into our region so that we can see how they perform. We've gotten grants, as an example, we had a phosphorus project, and that was really to encourage companies to come in, and we provided subsidies for homeowners to be able to install some of those technologies so we could kick the tires on them and see how they were performing. There are a number of technologies right now that are not, either not in the state, or they are, they haven't received any sort of an approval, or they're similar to something that we're working on here, like the Suffolk County, through Stony Brook University. They have a system that they've put together that was based on a lot of principles that has been worked on at the test center. So that is one of the active things that we do, is identifying new technologies and working with existing technology vendors and encouraging them to come up with their own solution. And that is having a pretty good effect. I mean, once George started working on wood chips, suddenly everybody in the industry is like, oh, I gotta do wood chips too. What's my wood chip thing? And there are a number of really established companies at this point that are saying, okay, I'm coming to the test center and I'm bringing my whatever widget that I've come up with. It probably involves wood chips somehow. But you know, as I said, that's something we actively do. I think that's a really important part of the test center. And through the RTP, I think that's another piece of it, which is identifying those technologies and bringing in the performance data so that towns are able to make good decisions on that.
And then, of course, new technology coming into the state, if they haven't started the process yet, there is a process that they do have to go through in order to be used within the state. So that's something that, you know, we want to be proactive if we're seeing a technology that hasn't been used here and the data seems to support that it's working in the state that it's in. You know, it's definitely having a discussion with that company and seeing what their thoughts are about operating within Massachusetts, because they will need to follow a process of being approved.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you would provide a huge service by standing in between us and DEP.
All right. Ed, you have some questions?
I have several. What I'm going to follow up with Steve's line of thinking, though, and the process currently, as I understand it, I may be wrong, so correct me, is that individual homeowners are required in certain areas to install an IA, including in Falmouth. If, you know, the Concom may say, hey, you're right next to a pond that needs help and you're going to build a new house or remodel it, you must put in an IA. The entire onus is on that homeowner. System with guidance from the Board of Health of what you can use, and they've developed a contract type of thing where the installers or the engineers have to give you a list of options and the pros and cons and the performance data on them and the costs, and then you need to sign that document for the Board of Health saying you have seen this information and you have chosen X, Y, or Z, if there were 3 of them. The entire onus is on the homeowner for paying for it, for the operation and maintenance and the testing and all that and the reporting. The data, I think MasTech is involved with, or Barnstable County, but the responsibility for monitoring that and looking at the data is on the Board of Health. What you're talking about in developing a list of approved contractors and town contractors, it sounds like putting the onus, the town is going to take some role in the contracting, and that seems like a 180 from homeowner to now town. And what that brings into, of course, is the opportunity for economies of scale. If you've got, hey, look, on the Cape and the towns that the SUP is responsible for working with, they're looking at 500 a year, 1,000 a year, 300 a year, whatever, a bigger number. You will entice larger contractors, I think. You might get, instead of, you know, the guy with a backhoe putting it in, you'll get Robert B. Auer. Because, hey, we've got the men, the equipment, the know-how, and we want to be involved in doing 500 a year. So that's a good thing. You get into the dangers of, prevailing wage contracts and all the things that a municipality has to comply with, and now suddenly you've increased the cost from what an individual homeowner might be able to negotiate with Sam and his backhoe and his son doing the hand digging. So that's, you know, it's a whole different direction for this. So I just throw that out as a cautionary and a question of how you would involve that. But, you know, to get to some of the questions, because I just came up with that one listening to Steve's insightful comments, it gets into a couple of things. One is, okay, now who would be paying your entity? The annual or the monthly or quarterly charges. You're going to be between the homeowner, the contractor, the engineers, and the municipality, and maybe DEP on monitoring and compliance. Do you foresee that as a set fee or a percentage, or how would you ultimately be paid after the grant and the structure is set up? Now this is an ongoing entity. How is the fees covered and by whom?
So We got a couple questions there, so
Right.
I want to unpack
Sorry.
the first one, because it's a really critical piece of this. And I guess it's really, what is the goal? I have to respond with a question, or a question of my own, is what is the goal of the town when it comes to assisting homeowners through this process, right? Because if you do it as a municipal function, and the town does take some responsibility for this, then you also engage potentially those other larger pools of money that can help offset costs for individual homeowners. So instead of individual homeowner having to pay the full freight for an installation, if you can work with SRF as an example, and the town is able to borrow some money and spread that cost over the tax base, you do it now with your sewer. It's the same concept, except it's just a different technology. You're able to offset some of that cost for individual homeowners. So you're starting at a lower price point for an IA system generally per parcel, right? If the town is able to subsidize some of that
Lower price point to
cost.
what, Brian?
What's that?
You say lower price point to the sewer?
Yeah, in a
Okay,
lot of these
just
projects
trying-
we're
You said
seeing.
lower price point to the sewer.
To the sewer, yes.
Okay.
In relative to sewer, if you look, looking around the Cape at some of the projects, Mashpee, Yarmouth, those projects are $100,000 per
Yep.
parcel. You look at average for IA systems, $50,000 per parcel. But is it still fair to just say the homeowner has to pay that full freight? Personally, I don't think so, especially when sewer homeowner got a huge subsidy for that $100,000. They're not paying $100,000. You're saying, okay, you get 20 or 30 or maybe 40. What is the subsidy level?
In Falmouth, the current sort of split, just so you got your numbers right, 70% of the cost is paid by the homeowner for the sewer showing up. 30% of the sewer showing up is being paid for by the town, and then the homeowner pays the cost of installation from the street to their house. Just
Right.
trying to
No,
keep
that's-
your numbers clean.
That's great. So how about that 30% then? Let's just say the 30% that the town is covering. How do you also make sure that the homeowners who are required to put in IA systems also get some sort of similar benefit? To me, that's equity, that's fair proposition, right? I don't think anybody could disagree with that. So I think, if you want to do that, then you need to really start to think in the direction of, now this is infrastructure. If we're gonna treat it like infrastructure and fund it the same way and engage those larger pools of money, SRF, or, if you're talking about SRF, you're talking about Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund forgiveness, potentially, up to that 25%. However, they've finagled the numbers to make that work now. Or even through the principal forgiveness through SRF itself, as that's available. So you have an opportunity to offset some of the costs to homeowners by thinking about this at a larger scale, rather than saying, you 2,000 homeowners, go do.
Yeah,
I think.
no, I think your perspective and your questions are all very reasonable. We're sort of on this little sort of march to figuring out what areas will we put the IAs in, but then part of that process that we will walk out of is to what extent should anybody who's inside a given area get something more than the 16 or 18,000 tax credit as well. So the economic side of it is, I'm not trying to shut you off, but it's a real question, and there's a fairness value that has to be worked out.
Right.
We're currently just trying to figure out how would you organize an entity, and how would you define an area that IAs have to go into to get to the selectmen and make some recommendations, and then the financing side of it's all in there. So I don't mind the discussion, but I think
Yeah.
knowing this board well enough, I don't want us to get sidetracked right now for the next hour.
We can save that
on
for further
finance.
discussion,
Yeah.
but suffice it to say, this is not just us up here talking about this. We've had substantive conversations with DEP and the Clean Water Trust about this exact topic, and how we can engage the SRF, the county's Aqua Fund program, and the tax credits to come up with an equitable program. So I
Good.
think we should have a more substantive discussion about it, because I think at the end of the day, it's about money. We have technology, how do we get it out there? How do we pay for it is one of the bigger questions.
Yeah.
How do we manage it? So I'm going to leave it to you to answer the second half of that question, which is like, what's the...
I didn't mean to cut you short, I just
Right.
wanted
No, that's okay.
to frame that it's a good question, but
Yes.
tonight we're not wrestling with that question.
Plus, if you let me with the microphone for too long.
So I think when it comes to how will certain services that the SUP provides, how will that get paid for? So I think when it comes to, sampling, that aspect of it, currently what that looks like is, it's really a timing fee, right? So how long does it take us to go, to travel, to go take the samples? You know, the cost of the lab doing the samples, right? Actually processing the data. When it comes to oversight, so like oversight of the O&M or oversight of installation, that would probably be more along the lines of a percentage, right? Traditionally to what would be, you know, a construction type of oversight, similar to that.
Like a project manager type of
management,
role. Okay. To just, you know, not to belabor the cost thing, but one of the things that I think someone mentioned is, you know, we kind of would look at the SUP as being the interface with the DEP to iron out the kinks in the process, get the details, get the regs clearly defined as to who's responsible for what. You know, is the Board of Health, what is their role going to be in this? Who's going to monitor that data, and what do you do when a system is non-compliant? It's approved for, you know, now most of them are approved for general use 25 or 19. Nothing is currently general use approved at a 12 or less or 10 or less, although that is probably the next phase. And, you know, what are you going to do about one that's not in compliance? Right now, I think it's kind of fuzzy and nothing's happening because DEP is not providing the direction. From a financial aspect, right now, Steve, the chair mentioned, you know, the tax credit of $18,000 that people are eligible for. But currently, is my understanding, that's only in a failed system. Would a mandated IA upgrade be considered a failed system? Probably not. So, hey, who's going to talk to DEP about that? I would think, and I hope the committee does, that maybe this is a role that MassTech and the SUP can be key in, because you're talking for maybe a larger group and trying to help the state and the municipality set policy.
Yeah.
So,
No, we have had, specifically on the failure question, we've had conversations with DEP to that regard, and thanks to the President's Bay Coalition and pushing through legislation that made changes to the SRF and the Betterment Law. Any project really that's related to nitrogen issues, so if it's a failure due to nitrogen, you know, not treating enough nitrogen, it counts as a
I think the
failure.
assumption that it's not eligible is a weak assumption.
well,
Yes.
that was my understanding, that the
No,
reg
I-
had to be changed to
I
allow that
think
in.
it's moving fairly quickly, if not
Yep.
already there.
Yep,
Yep.
that's an important part of this aspect.
If you're new construction, like total new construction, you don't get the benefit of those things.
Right.
but-
Right. Steve mentioned about, or Tom, I think, just residential, but you're not excluding commercial, you said, that's not something you haven't looked at, but are you looking at, like, the residential clusters? There's some being built in Falmouth now to serve a multiple 40B type of arrangement. Do you see that immediately falling under the SUP, or maybe as you expand into larger scale?
I don't see why it couldn't fall into this up.
Because I know one of them that we had a presentation on was the nitro, and they're putting a large-scale system for multiple residents, one. And recently, a 40B type development's proposed in North Falmouth, 24 houses on 4 acres. That, you know, one of the big questions that now has been raised immediately is, well, what are you going to do about septic? And they're saying, Title V, that's all we need to do. And it's like, yikes. So I think there's a role that can be played there also. Testing and monitoring methodology now. I had a long talk with Bruce Walton about this from his task force, and, you know, what is the state of the art of remote monitoring? And he said, Brian and David has to talk to. So, you know, nothing is approved now by DEP. Is that something you're actively looking at? And what you see as the trend and what hopefully can get approved? Reduce the cost, obviously.
Well, I think this is all tied in, and I think, John, you've been a part of those discussions back when you were coming up with that RME, the model bylaw, a number of years ago with George and others, which is how can we reduce the number of sampling events on systems? How can we reduce the number of potential inspections? And DEP, has made a fairly clear commitment that remote monitoring can offset physical visits to sites, which is, that's a huge reduction in cost potentially. They have yet to define what that really looks like. You know, I'll talk about the nitro technology because that's sort of the, you know, the one that's out front right now. Does have a remote monitoring component built into it that's able to check the air pressure. So that, I mean, you can tell it's getting air to the system. The design of that system is such that if you're getting air to it in that first part, you're probably also denitrifying. You have a pretty good bet that that system's functioning properly. And it'll send an alert if the pressure drops to zero. So, you know, that's an example of remote monitoring that we can engage on these systems. And the other is the nitrogen sensor that there was a challenge that went through the test center a number of years ago. There was a clear winner in that particular challenge to develop a low-cost nitrogen sensor. They've really struggled mightily to commercialize that particular unit to a reasonable cost. I think their current thinking on cost is something like $5,000 or $6,000, which just isn't, it's just not workable. What started as something that should have been $1,000, $1,500 and really would be somewhat trivial in the bigger, you know, capital cost picture is now, unfortunately, seems to be moving out of reach. But there are these other lower cost and simpler methodologies like the, you know, the air sensor. Some of the other technologies, Advantex I'll use as an example. They have a system called Vericom, which actually communicates with their technology in real time, and they can see how long pumps have been running or how long this air blower has been running. And they can affect changes remotely as well for that particular technology. So it would be great if they entered the arena as well, because it, you know, it gives us that opportunity. But I think it's really important. It offsets that long-term operation and maintenance cost. And by it being a physical piece of technology, you can put that on the capital expense side of things where we can avail ourselves of those other funding opportunities and not have that be on the homeowner.
Do you see a
So
receptiveness of
I want
DEP?
to jump in here just a little bit. I want to concur with you a little bit. The whole exercise of trying to get a low-cost nitrogen sensor was an admirable effort, but it didn't get to the point where you could start plugging these into thousands of homes with the reliability. However, I do agree with you that on the flip side, being able to monitor things like blowers and oxygen and other things, that I think as we get into more installations, you can build a model that says, okay, we've gone out and we're doing the monitoring. The monitoring, the hard monitoring, the reading the values coincides with what we're seeing. It's sort of like at one point you had to do BOD for wastewater, wait 5 days to get the result. But the DEP and others over time allowed COD, which is almost an instantaneous test, as a surrogate for where the BOD is going to go. So I think there's some focus on how to make this work. It's a case of getting up to scale and building the data that shows. I was encouraged when we heard that monitoring the blower pressure was actually turned out to be a surrogate for efficiency of the system. Because that's pretty easy to measure.
That's a cheap sensor.
It's pretty easy
The
to
key
measure.
question is there any, do you feel there's a receptiveness on DEP's part to even consider that going forward? I mean, are you having a regular dialogue with them about things like that?
Yep, we do. We
So-
talk to them quite frequently.
And I'll throw back to at one point, BOD was the only way you could prove that your wastewater system was working. And over a period of time, enough people switched to COD because it allowed them to switch, I'm gonna get technical now, to monitor their mixed liquor, suspended solids, and their DO and their aeration basin and tweak it to achieve their discharge criteria. But they were using COD all the time, and there was a one-to-one correlation built in. You know, the DEP does not do things on an experimental basis. They take their time getting there, but they do get there. I would hypothesize, or I would actually take $5 out of my pocket and put it up on the table to say, once we have enough of these things in place and we're measuring things like the pressure of the blower and other things, that the DEP will say, okay, that's an acceptable parameter going forward, okay? They don't move fast. I'm not saying that they're gonna win the Preakness, but they do get there.
How about the Derby?
Well, the Derby's all done. The Preakness is coming up though, right? Am I off? Does anybody know, has the Preakness happened yet?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I think it's coming up this weekend, right?
We're off
I'll talk to you later about how I'm gonna bet, okay?
We're off topic.
No, sorry.
That's enough for me.
Thank you. I believe John Waterbury would like to chime in.
I had a couple of questions. So we're in the process now of beginning to try and formulate 14 watershed permits. And we assume that at the end of that process, DEP is going to tell us, we approve that watershed permit, you're going to have to remove a certain amount of nitrogen from that watershed every year, and you're going to have to demonstrate that to us. And that may be through sewering and a combination of sewering and IAs. One of the services you didn't touch on with the SUP is that a town might make a contract with the SUP to do all the things which you outlined. But you didn't mention then, you could also be the responsible entity to report to DEP that we are in fact making what we say we are in each watershed on an annual basis. So the town in theory could sublet that whole process to the SUP to deal with.
Absolutely, yeah. We never know what to include in a presentation, what's going to be too boring to talk about.
Right.
I think about reporting as being one of those things. But yeah, no, that's a great point. And is one of the, it's one of the things we specialize in at the county. We have for a long time with the IA tracking program. We have that built in now as a feature of the septic utility program. But yeah, I mean, you can consider us consultants in that regard in helping the town calculate those numbers at the end of the year. And DEP knows that it was collected by as David said, an unbiased third party. They know it's good data.
Okay. Was that, you have more, John? Tom?
I just was Googling your website, and I noticed, on the sheet, it indicates that there's, point of contact for, homeowners and lists of licensed soil evaluators, and I was just wondering, is this information something that'll become available on the website, or how do people get that information now?
It will be available on the website. The website itself, the county, we've been waiting to update it because we wanted to get our name first approved to be changed. So now that it has been, we'll see the website being updated, and we'll have more information on it as well.
Excellent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. And the services ultimately are determined by the town that we provide. This is just a menu of options. We don't have to do all these. The town could retain as much or as little. You could say, we want you to do this, this, and this, and this.
Right.
This is the starting point.
And it can change, right?
Yeah,
Like
it
can change from year to year, depending on how your needs change.
Mm-hmm. But we've got grant money. We got people paid for and
Yep.
consider us free consultants on all this stuff.
Right.
So, sorry, Kristen.
What grant funds, huh? You have another question?
Nope, that's it.
Ken?
Well, at this point, you've answered a lot of questions for folks, and they've touched on most of the things that I was curious about. I wonder if you could talk just a bit more about the AquaFund. What is the capacity of that fund, and how is it sustained? Where does the money come from?
Yep. AquaFund is one of my programs. I've become a banker in addition to being a technologist and manager of technologies and all that fun stuff. AquaFund has been approved to borrow an additional $13 million from the state, which is the first salvo, really. Looking forward and really focusing just on sewer connections over the next 10 to 20 years. That program will likely need to borrow probably somewhere in the realm of $15 to $20 million per year to cover the demand. And we're in constant communication with the Clean Water Trust so that they understand kind of what we think is coming down the pike. As towns really start to hone in on their plans, we suspect that number will probably slowly creep up. So, that program, I think, for the long term will be adequately funded. We, of course, recently changed the interest rate structure for that program such that lower income families are able to get lower interest rates. Those who are less than 120% of area median income can get a 0% loan, those between 120 and 180% of AMI get a 2% loan, and then anybody above 180% is able to get a 4% loan from that program. The actual operation, the administration of the program comes out of that 2 and 4% piece of things. So we're able to loan out, let's say, at 4% for those projects, and then borrow from the state for at 2%. So we got that sort of marginal 2% that covers all of our operational costs moving forward. So it's a very sustainable program. We've set it up in a way such that we can keep it running very well over the long term, and make sure that those administrative costs are all covered and everything.
And so, now, is it just individual homeowners that apply for this? And what about new construction and?
Yeah, no, those are great questions. We're really tied to the betterment law, so the only thing that we're allowed to do is residential systems, and they have to be replacements. We can't do any new construction through the program, unfortunately. It's just not something. It's actually a Board of Health oriented program, and we function. We've been authorized by the state.
So that's a
bar.
hole that needs to be filled, because obviously, well, new construction is an opportunity to put in highly efficient IA systems.
Yeah.
But at the moment, you're saying that that's a gap. We don't.
That is a gap, unfortunately. We can't,
Okay.
the betterment, unless we'd have to change the legislation in order to do that. We also can't do any commercial work. We had a program for a very short period of
What's
time
the, but commercial, I mean, for
We'll go to the
example,
audience and come back.
is a
Boards had questions.
multi-family
Okay.
structure considered commercial?
No, we look at those as residential. And we can work with condo associations. Typically, we do the whole association.
What
as a
about a
group.
40B kind of?
We can work with those groups, yeah. I mean, we really tried to set this up so that we can work with those groups.
'Cause that was one of the arguments that I always used to hear on the zoning board from 40B developers, is that if we went with an alternative system, it would make the project uneconomic, therefore we don't want to do it. And under the 40B law, that's one of the criteria, so we can, we could not impose that limitation. So maybe that's changing, I don't know.
But yeah, so further to the interest rates, the only folks who can get those lower interest rates, they have to have the income qualification, but they also have to be part of a nitrogen mitigation project. It has to be like a town planned, like, this is our CWMP.
You have to be in a watershed.
Yeah, you have to be in a watershed. It's not just, if you want to put on a third bedroom, or if you're just trying to get nitrogen reduction credits for groundwater separation, or, those kinds of things. You can still get a loan, it's just a 4% loan, which is probably better than market rate right now.
So that's a
So I
reason,
get- yeah.
that's a good reason to implement these plans. More people will be eligible to save money if they are lower income.
I would offer, Ken, that if you go to CMR 21, the old nitrogen sensitive zones,
Yeah.
the preamble is very well written relative to public health and the need to do things. And that even if you're a 40B inside a region that's in a nitrogen sensitive zone, that you could sort of, anybody with the proper use of that preamble could require that we get
I
an
agree
IA
with you.
system, and that.
But you have to have a nitrogen-sensitive zone designated,
They have to be in a nitrogen sensitive zone.
and that was one issue. is
They'd have
not-
to be in a
not every-
nitrogen sensitive zone, but then I think they would qualify in for the better rate. So I think there's a path there, inside the nitrogen
There
sensitive
is a
zones.
path, I agree with the.
And if you want to get outside the nitrogen sensitive zone with this committee, be very circumspect with it.
Well, no, it's not that, it's that there were not necessarily nitrogen-sensitive zones defined always.
But now there are.
Yeah.
Now there are.
So that has helped for sure. And the other question I had, kind of, not a question so much, but because there's been quite a bit of discussion about your relationship with DEP, but I just was, you say you do not have regulatory or enforcement power, so you are relying on DEP and/or boards of health or towns
Board of Health.
for that.
Board of Health.
Yep, like-
Just to clarify, the DEP, the way all the stuff that I've read, Ken, the DEP will come down on the town over time under the watershed permits for non-compliance. They do not come down on individuals, but at the Board of Health level, they can reach back to individuals. Okay? I think that's the
right.
hierarchy.
Yep.
That's
Like-
right.
Like all county services, with the exception of the Cape Cod Commission, they're the only ones who have any modicum of regulatory authority, which I'm sure we're probably all familiar with. We're here to support. That's the entire point of Barnstable County, is to support the towns in their projects and needs. So you maintain regulatory authority. We provide the support services through either our knowledge or ability to get grants and additional funding, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
Steve?
You have more, hold that, everybody hold for a second. You have more
No, I'm
questions?
good. I'm good.
Okay, we've heard questions from the entire board so far. I'm gonna open it up to the audience and then come back to the board, okay? So is there anybody in the audience that has a question on the SUP concept? We'll recognize the delegate from the British Beer Company. Oh, no, Buzzards Bay Coalition, sorry, BBC.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. Corin Peterson from the Buzzards Bay Coalition. I'm going to take just a minute to offer my 5-star Yelp review for the SUP so far. They did take over the monitoring of now 31 septic systems in West Falmouth for us. So they are doing all of the sampling for them, and they're off to a wonderful start. So 5-star reviews so far. 2 questions. Recommended technologies. When do you foresee sort of your first cut of technology, your recommended? You said it would be broader than DEP's best available nitrogen-reducing technologies. When do you think yours is going to be out?
We are hoping by August.
That's great news. Awesome. And then because that will be very helpful for the town. It sort of
Right.
gives them a menu of maybe it doesn't have to be all 10 milligram per liter systems. Maybe it can be somewhere in between. My next question is a challenge that we have been facing is the turnaround on the sampling. So you go out and you take your sample, you bring it to the lab, and you don't get your results for another 3 weeks. And so that's an O&M then, that's an operational challenge because you don't know for almost a month. Are you all doing anything to sort of try to expedite that and get as much information as possible so towns know that they are on their way to meeting their watershed permits?
I'll entertain the question, but it's a little outside the SUP. That's all I'm gonna say.
Okay.
The turnaround time for the labs, okay?
Apologies, Your Honor.
No problem. I just don't want this
Well, I
to
think we have an
devolve
answer.
into a lab discussion.
I can only speak to the Barnstable County Lab. I meet with the director once a month and give him a hard time about his turnaround times. They are working to address some of their staffing shortages. The lab in particular has suffered pretty heavily through COVID and staff changeover there. So they're working to address that. One of the other things we're working on that's a little bit more within our own control is expansion of the laboratory services at MassTC. We have a current research laboratory out at the test center, and we are in the process of receiving a rather large grant from the state. Can't talk about it right now, one of those things. That will allow us to significantly expand our laboratory out there and offer short turnaround diagnostics at a minimum, and we'd probably look to potentially get certification so that we can further, bolster existing lab capability. So stay tuned on that.
Yeah.
That's great.
I will jump into this lab conversation after I tried to cut it off, and I will say that both the water department and the wastewater department in several communities struggle to get lab turnaround time right now. If we throw conservatively 10 to 12,000 over the next 8 or 10 years, additional locations that need to be sampled, there is a real either market or crisis, one or the other. And I would hope that folks that know what they're doing and want to monetize things figure out how to solve this. But yeah, I think part of the backlog is that there's a steady upcreep of the need for certain sampling that is pushing the boundaries of the available capacity of the labs that can do it, whether it's your lab or the 3 available private labs. So it's,
Yeah. And they take our subcontract.
anybody that's got
Yeah.
$30,000 or
Yeah, right.
$40,000 that wants to join in with me to go fund a couple of good labs. It's a real issue.
It is, it is. And just to extend, if I may, just for a moment, on the broader workforce problem, as David mentioned, training. We've been in contact with the tech schools and the high schools and Cape Cod Community College. We want to put together a comprehensive training program because we need installers, we need designers, we need operators, and we need those things for sewers and for IA systems. So there's a tripping wire up ahead of all of us right now in the workforce availability that we need to really start to think about and address. So in your own capacities, perhaps put some thought into how to develop water workforce because it's really gonna hamstring us all.
Good. I think I had another hand out there. Jonathan? Yeah, please.
I was wondering if you guys could expand on the database component. Is it just going to be chemical data? Is it going to have cost data for annual costs, operations, installations? How comprehensive is it going to be, and it will be publicly available?
So currently the database, besides having information about what system is actually on a property and when it was installed and any of the regulations revolving around that system, is the sampling data is put into that system. No, we don't really have cost data in it, so, because it's really individual homeowners, so we don't really put the cost in there.
If we do produce that data, we would publish it via some other format,
Right.
probably on the web.
Yeah.
Through the Aquafund program, we have insight into current project costs, which are ever escalating for reasons I don't fully understand. It seems to be beyond the cost of inflation right now in the rate of increase of projects in terms of cost. But as we develop that information, we make it as publicly accessible as we can. With respect to the chemical parameter data, right now you can access the performance data for the existing IA septic system technologies on Cape Cod through masstc.org. There's a technology section in there that you can go in and look at the individual technologies and then get the performance data on them. You can't see where the systems physically are to protect the homeowners, but you can look at the data yourself if you want. That'll eventually transition over to a more RME-centric website, but for now it's living on masstc.org.
Are there any more? Yep.
Melissa Odell, I just was unsure how you can have a uniform price for installation on something that could be wildly different, the lot size and the...
I'm going to answer your question for you. So the example that we have is back when the town has put in low-pressure sewer systems. They're basically little pump stations in every front yard. The town gets a price for that device, and the town procures it. And then the contractor shows up, and the cost of installation is variable by property. But the price of the device, which in the case of the IA system is a concrete tank with some pumps and parts. So I think we're looking at trying to see if there's a pathway to get a good price on the concrete pumps and parts, but the actual installation cost will vary by depth of groundwater and everything else. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, but that's just a little teeny piece of it.
I'd say it's better than half of it. Brian, would you agree?
Yeah.
The concrete piece is probably half of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's entirely dependent on site conditions. You can have one site where it's, you're in and out for $20,000, and you can have, the same system installed in a different site, and it costs $80,000.
But it's not a small component. It's thousands of dollars for a
Right.
component, thousands of dollars to put in the yard.
Just really brief.
Go ahead.
And there's something to be said for leaving the homeowner the freedom to negotiate with local contractors to do the installation anyway, because it's a more personal thing. And the town could still reimburse it.
Hilda, you want to step up and have a comment?
Brian, the cost that you mentioned for the IA installation, does that include landscaping? Because it's hugely different for each site and might be a huge cost to fix up after you install the IAs.
No, my numbers don't include landscaping. There's too much variability, and we don't,
So the average is 50,000 plus all the landscaping.
plus the landscaping. Yep.
So at this point, I'm going to just run a quick survey
Well,
down.
I have one.
No, I'm going to run a quick survey down the board.
Okay.
See if there's any follow-up questions. We'll start with Ken.
Okay, so this is actually not about septic systems, but listening to you reminded me that a while back, Steve tasks myself and Jordan Moore to come up with ideas for monitoring the ponds and what constitutes success if we, if we go through with these watershed management plans, post-sewering and everything, so that we can convince DEP that in fact whatever mitigation we did was suitable. And then, so, we've been toying with various ideas, one of which is, again, involves instrumenting the ponds, putting in perhaps sondes to measure oxygen dynamics and chlorophyll and so forth. And then the question came on who manages that process. And since you are already working on developing strategies for managing septic, you came up as one possible, the county at least, came up as one possible entity to do that. I actually wrote Erica Woods about this, and she thought that this would be worth discussing. I mean, other entities, we talked about the wastewater division in each municipality. We talked about third-party contractors. But somewhere down the line, someone needs to probably do this. And so just to put that on your radar, if you haven't already thought about it, it seems like you're putting together the kind of lab and personnel capabilities that might be suitable for addressing these questions.
I hadn't, I knew that as in the scope of things that need to get done. I hadn't really thought of that as a function, but certainly as a Barnstable County function. That's what Barnstable County is for, providing those services.
Ken just did one of a little off the SUP topic, but when it got to the lab capability, I could see the connection. So it's good to think about that. Okay. You have more, Ken?
Nope, that was it.
Ed?
I've asked enough, I think. We'll be in touch.
Steve?
Earlier in your talk, when I asked about being a vendor, you said, yes, we pay you for some of your services. And then later, one of you said, some of your services are free. I will be overjoyed when this scope comes with a price list.
Right.
Where you mentioned that which ones are free and what the price is for other things. And that will go an immense way for people taking you seriously, and it will help people plan. As a planning document, it would be incredibly valuable.
Right.
And also make the distinction between things that are currently, this town loves grants. Who doesn't love a grant? I mean, it's free money by definition.
$50 bill.
Very good. But when the town passes bylaws and so on, we're committing to decades of future operation. It's not like getting a grant to design some new thing. It's for long-term operation and funding, acquiring things over many years. So it should always be made clear when you're relying on a grant and when you're talking about real money.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. The EPA money that we received, we really had seen from the beginning as seed money for a program that needs to become self-sustained over time. And whether ultimately that self-sustaining is we're performing most of the services for a town, or we're just consulting and assisting in the town and setting up their own SUP or RME. That's, like I said, a lot of this is paid for by grants right now. Utilize that to the best of your ability. So consider us, at least in that respect, as free consultants. And then,
Right.
If the town decided to use us, our program moving forward for maintenance, whatever it may be, we'd need to agree on some sort of scope of services that we were providing. And then that's, we can we can make some estimates of what individual pieces may cost, but once the whole package is together of what the town might want, that's when the, you know, the real numbers start to come together, and working out who pays for what, et cetera, so.
We can circle back to this. John?
I have one brief comment. Having served on the Board of Health for 30 years, as we begin to scale these things up, I don't believe it's reasonable for the Board of Health to be the responsible entity managing these, which is why we absolutely need a SUP to do this. The Board of Health already, with the 100 or so that we try to manage, are over our heads. So I think that's part of the reason why you're here tonight, is that that's just beyond the scale of which the Board of Health is going to be able to deal with.
Well, thank you for that perspective, John. That's exactly why they're here, because we can't launch into thousands of these without a program. Tom?
Just to thoroughly and happily endorse what John just said, the numbers that are looming out there, coming over the horizon, are going to be a real problem. And I'll finish there.
So no political bias here, but the far left-hand end?
So I just wanted to kind of thank you for that preliminary or prelude, because I think my question is a little bit about process now. So the hope is that, or at least, I don't want to say hope, but a potential scenario is that the town would contract with the county SUP program to manage these IA systems. But we need to come up with that bylaw or policy
We need to work
within the next year.
The exercise we're engaged in for the next couple of months is working to the point where through both the Board of Health and ourselves, that we can make a recommendation to the selectmen and possibly the planning board as necessary for the structure and format to implement a manageable system for requiring IAs and monitoring IAs,
So that potential contract wouldn't exist for another year or so. Is that fair to say?
I feel a sense of urgency for getting something in place. Less than a year would be great. More than a year would be not so great. How's that? But I don't want to put a timetable on it, because we have a lot of things to work our way through over the next several meetings.
Right. So I guess my question is, like, between now and then, is it possible for individual homeowners to, reach out to the SUP for services and assistance, or does it have to be through the town?
It doesn't exist yet. We would have to create a SUP.
Okay.
We'd have to create a SUP in the town within specific watersheds or for multiple watersheds. It's not there.
Okay.
yet. This is to tell you what it might be and what it might do.
Okay.
Okay?
All right. That makes more sense. Thank you.
All right.
This was really,
Gentlemen,
I was
go
gonna say,
ahead.
this was really just meant as an introduction. Obviously, there's more discussions to be had, especially about what particular services the town is looking for. And then, as Brian said, then really talking about the cost. I mean, as Brian said, right now, we exist due to grants. And so, our expertise, and I think that's what was alluded to before as being free, our expertise right now is free because we're here through grants. So definitely utilize us. We're here to further talk about this, and to really hone in on the details, and obviously then the pricing as well.
Trust me, we will have you back. Okay? I want to thank both of you for putting this together. This has been an hour and a half long discussion, and a much-needed discussion within the framework of how we get defining geozones and other things, and then what we'll do with that when we get there. So I appreciate your time and your thoughts and your effort. I speak on behalf of the board when I say that.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda is reports of members and staff. I am going to do a very brief report and hand you something, Brian, before you walk out the door, okay? So on urine diversion, there's several aspects of urine diversion going on. Steve is our representative to the conversation or liaison committee or whatever, on a sort of a parallel path, just so everybody's aware of it. A long time ago, we sent information off through Amy Lowell's office to the DEP saying, this is what we think we're doing, can you tell us what you think? To Mary Beth, and Mary Beth has passed that down the line to a person named Layden Langley. And Layden Langley has recently reached back out to try to have a conversation through Amy with a Board of Health member and whatnot. So we kind of have a little bit of two parallel paths momentarily because we're working with you. And I would hope that we can close that gap fairly quickly so we're all talking as one voice. But I think the Board of Health is likely to nominate George Hofelder to be their representative. I think that's the last missing piece. There was a flurry of emails over the day today. But I just wanted to, Brian, share with you, and you can have a copy of this correspondence back and forth about this call and whatnot, and perhaps you can reach through Amy or whatnot to make sure that you're perhaps included on that conversation as well, okay? At this moment, because of the biology of my system, I'm going to turn the chairmanship over to Steve and come back.
Now that we can completely change the agenda, no, just kidding. The next item is reports of members and staff.
I don't think I have anything to report.
Tom?
I think I told the committee this already. Chuck Martinson and I will be presenting at the Cape Coastal Conference on the 18th, the Eel River data, the oyster production and nitrogen sequestration. That's coming up 2 weeks from now.
John?
All right, I lied. Sorry, I do have an update.
Oh, go ahead.
I just realized that it's probably helpful for me to update a little bit on the stormwater, the boat ramp stormwater projects, given that this might be my last meeting in a little while. And I just wanted to say that both of those have kind of stalled due to funding issues. So that a Mgmt Pond boat ramp is, we applied for a SNEP grant. Unfortunately, it was not selected to go to full proposal. And the Wacoit Bay landing site, we were trying to work with the town to put together a CZM, coastal habitat and water quality grant. Coastal CZM is the Coastal Zone Management Office. Unfortunately, we were unable to pull that all together in time for a proposal for that grant. So those two projects are kind of stalled where they are right now. They're both permitted, the Mgmt is permitted. Wacoit Bay is through 25% designs. So I just wanted to give a brief update on that. So it's in the record.
Thank you.
We hope you'll still be able to report on those to us occasionally.
Yeah, and so
In your new
APCC is
capacity.
planning on, pursuing funding again next year, but for this year, a little bit paused.
Ed?
I've got a couple of things I've been playing with, and for lack of a better term. One is how I became very interested in Brian and David coming tonight and getting a very good educational presentation, and that was, the grant funding. From information I got out of a couple of meetings back when we had the people talk about the state-of-the-art nitro system and how that works. They had a bunch of links on there. One of them went to the Nature Conservancy, which turned out, digging into their reports, they had given Mastec a grant a couple of years ago for $100,000 to look at funding options for helping homeowners in the IA process. And in discussions with a lot of great feedback from the people at the Nature Conservancy, they said Mastec is now putting together a kind of a revised proposal and is spending those funds to do what they're doing. So they're part of, Nature Conservancy is part of the grant funding that Brian mentioned, is supporting their effort now in the planning and development of the SUP. So that's great because, somebody needs to go after those grants. And Steve said, Falmouth loves them, but I'm not sure it loves them enough to be aggressive as Brian and company can be at Nature Conservancy and these larger international well-funded organizations. They have the money. And as part of that too, the Nature Conservancy put me in touch with an organization called the New England Water Environment Association, which has a fantastic website full of all kinds of data. And they introduced me to a gentleman named Bruce Walton, who is the volunteer chair of a task force on IAs, which, you know, has become a very, very important topic Cape-wide, nationwide, and particularly in Falmouth as we get into this. And I think it's, I can't emphasize enough how important I feel it is to, yeah, quicker the better, because, you know, we're not getting these estuaries any better with doing sewers in 10-year increments or longer. Faster impact will come from IA mandates and assistance, and however we can make that happen in these impaired zones. And then New England Water Environment Association is primarily a trade group, people who are in the business of this, but they also have a tremendous amount of, call it volunteer things, and Bruce heads up this task force, IA On-Site Wastewater Treatment System, IAOWTS. Mouthful, but I finally figured out what it all means. And one of the databases they're working on and will be releasing pretty soon, I think will address a question that came up from the public as far as, well, cost of different systems, actual cost of installations. They're keeping it, of course, anonymous, so you can't identify what homeowner paid what for what system, but it will give an analysis of the engineering, the install, the hardware costs in specifics, and then they'll have some average. Here's the normal cost with a regular installation, and here's the outliers. And I became aware of a recent install in Falmouth, $150,000 for a total system because they had a failed waterfront property and had to replace everything. $150,000 for the IA, but that was everything. They had to do, you know, septic tanks, the whole Title V thing, plus the IA component, and a very challenging site. So that it can be all over the place. How to help people fund that is very important. So that data is going to be available from this task force report and spreadsheets, and when it's released, I'll be notified and pass it on to the committee for distribution and the general public access wherever possible. And Nature Conservancy is also working on some spreadsheets to break those costs out so people have more specific information relative to real-time actual installs, not just theoretical stuff. Because, yeah, it's all over the place, but the average is in that $30,000, $40,000. And one of the things they're doing very stringently is they're trying to make sewers cost you this much per household, and IAs cost you this much, to show how they compare not only for the original out-of-pocket costs for the town, for the homeowners, but also for the ongoing operation and maintenance. So a lot of good stuff coming. I'll keep the committee appraised as I continue this interface with these groups, but I think very worthwhile contact, so I'll keep pushing on it.
Sounds like you've delved in pretty far here, and that's good.
It's getting deep.
I always like to do the little benchmark thing that says you have to put 2 IAs in to get the equivalent of 1 sewer. So you have to add up the 2 IA costs and compare it to 1 sewer cost to get the same nitrogen removal each time. Okay?
Yeah.
I'm just going to finish the reports of members and staff. There are 2
Go ahead.
more to go.
Go ahead.
And then turn it back to you.
Run down the list.
I did have another item I
go
want
ahead.
to toss out there under my member input. I don't know enough about the science and where it is, technology and cost-wise. We had a good presentation a couple of meetings ago about permeable reactive barriers. I'm very concerned about particularly West Falmouth Harbor, but what's going on along Buzzards Bay, particularly looking at just, you know, what that harbor looks like this week. It's awful. What's causing it? A whole bunch of stuff, as we know. You know, treated effluent going through the groundwater from our wastewater treatment plant. We know that's an issue. We're spent millions to upgrade the plant to a state-of-the-art level of performance that the town can be justifiably proud of. The impact of that to improve the harbor is slow and hasn't been felt yet in actual, what's that harbor look like? There's problems with stormwater runoff, to some of the stuff Jordan's been working on, and, what might make sense there. IAs and when and if we'll develop this, and hopefully quick, according to Steve's timeframe. Is there something else that can be done? A more stringent fertilizer, ban irrigation, whatever? Because I go by there and I see the greenest lawns in town or right along the harbor, and they lay down the fertilizer and then turn the irrigation on, and guess where it's washing in? Either right to the harbor or down the storm drain and eventually there, or you get a heavy rain. So ways to regulate that, and the last question I toss out for my education and consideration is there a place for permeable reactive barrier as an interim action that the town might want to look into to take along particularly West Falmouth Harbor to try and quicker have an impact on the health of that poor, distressed body of water? That's it.
Can I comment on that?
I hope so.
Well, first of all, we've done a lot of work at MBL on the location of the plume, so we do know where most of the nitrogen is arriving. It's deep because it was, originated so far away, and it's a fairly massive plume. It took 12 to 13 years to arrive at the harbor after they started the process of treating effluent there. And so, it's taking at least that long to come out. The data, we just submitted a publication. We'll see whether it's approved for publication or not after peer review. But the data suggests that there's been some storage in the aquifer. So it's taking even longer than that 10 to 12 years to completely flush out. And so the whole process is retarded in terms of how long it will take for the harbor to feel any impacts from the upgrade. And I'm thinking that with Steve's push towards an outfall, there will be zero
John
nitrogen.
Waterbury's push, I'm just
There will
following.
be zero nitrogen entering that watershed, and we will still be seeing some effects. So your idea of a reactive barrier is not a bad one. I know there's concern at DEP about how close you can do EVO to a water body. And so that might be one thing that needs to be taken into account. But it is possible that you could have some benefits.
You would hope that the permitting was faster than the time for it to wash out.
Well,
I think that permitting will be in that, and that's even with a pessimistic view towards the permitting.
but let me point out that if you divert the water that's providing some of the hydraulic head for that plume to Falmouth Heights, that plume is going to be even more retarded before it
Right,
gets to
that
the
would
harbor.
actually slow it down possibly.
Yeah, that's going to slow it down even more.
Good point. Can we do
So,
something
so
sooner to
the,
help the
so,
harbor?
so thinking about, I guess I'm sort of validating your thought that maybe thinking about trying to do some kind of an EVO barrier there would be valuable.
And I think it's worth looking at, not being a scientist in depth, but, I'm learning a lot by
Yeah,
these
I think
presentations.
that, one issue is that the hydrodynamics might be complicated. It's not like in the outwash plane. And even in the outwash plane, it's more complicated than you think it's going to be, as we saw from Shorewood Drive, so.
It might be something worth looking at. I know there'd be, what town control land. I would suspect with the commitment of people around there, there might be homeowners willing to, hey, yeah, you can do it on my property. Just restore it after you've done your drilling and testing.
Right.
So I think, to me,
I
it's
see a
worth looking
hand.
at.
Hold on a second. So this is a little bit of a spitballing sort of thing going on right here.
Just tossing it out.
And I think that one of Ken's key points was the plume is not near the surface, okay? As water comes downhill like this and rainfall keeps falling on it, it pushes the nitrogen portion down so that it's down quite a ways and then surfaces, last time I looked at all the stuff, a little further out in West Falmouth than at the edge of West
Well,
Falmouth.
I think it's in
So
the
I
harbor.
think your
I think it's
comment,
at the edge.
I think your comment possibly, there is a town bylaw right now that you should not be fertilizing within 100 feet of the water body. And I think the first low-hanging fruit might be to sort of figure out who should be enforcing that and say, hey, can we blanket a certain group of people in that area and remind them not to be putting their fertilizer on their beautiful lawns. I mean, croquet is a great game, but you can play it on brown grass. Steve, are you ready?
One last report of member and staff, unless you want to give one too.
I don't want to do anything.
Okay. And then I'll turn it back to you.
We've got 15 minutes.
Steve asked me to report in my capacity as newly appointed representative to the Urine Diversion Liaison Committee. There isn't much to report because we haven't had a meeting yet, but I have, and Brian can add to this if he wishes or correct it. But I just wanted to say that from the draft documents I've seen, there seem to be three major goals of this $80,000 pilot prep project, or whatever you want to call it. One is to determine how to get the appropriate data that DEP is going to want to give us credit. Two is to set up all the infrastructure necessary to run the full pilot project. And three is to do some sort of market research intrinsically. And that's all I have to say.
And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, through Amy's earlier correspondence with the DEP and now their response back, there may be a little bit of a mix as to what the DEP thinks is going to happen here. And I think over the next couple of weeks that should get worked out through a phone call or whatever. It may turn out not to be an IA exercise so much as a Title V change. We'll see where that all shakes out. So,
But if it's
It's
a
a
Title,
moot-
if it's a Title V change, they by definition have not answered the question.
Well,
Because the question is,
I hear you.
will there be credit for
I hear you, but this is,
nitrogen,
we have the DEP engaged in a conversation finally.
which is a good thing.
Trying to get on the phone, we're trying to set up a call and see what everybody's concerns are and figure out where we're at and where we're going, okay? And I'm not gonna presume anything right this minute, one way or another. John, you wanna talk about the outfall? Is it finished? Are we testing it? Where are we at?
Which handle do I flip?
I don't think there's any update at this point.
Okay, good. Aquaculture?
Just, well, you were out of the room. I mentioned that Chuck and I are gonna present on the Eel River results at the Cape Coastal Conference in 2 weeks.
Nice. You wanna talk about water quality, stormwater?
She already did.
I
You
mentioned
have to
Oh,
watch
I
that.
missed it. I'll have to
Turn
stay
this
up.
all over to
I'll have
Steve, he
to-
did it all.
I'll have to stay up late tonight and watch the video.
right.
Okay, good.
Wait, I have a report, because I'm staff. I was out yesterday sampling the PRB. It's the every 6-month sampling. So field condition data basically says
Can you
it's...
identify yourself? No.
Field data says it's still working, so.
It's working.
Good.
So we're what, 5 years in now?
Four.
4 years in.
Impressive.
We've invented a perpetual motion machine.
That's good. That's good. All right. Minutes of the prior meeting, I have nothing to say because I wasn't here. Tom, you want to lead the conversation?
Yeah, I just had little minor changes, and I'm going to vote that, or I'm going to move, excuse me, that they be accepted as I presented them. Is that self-assuming on my part?
Second that motion.
I had one change, Kirsten. When there's the discussion of the report about the eelgrass DEP meeting, it mentions that Scott Gallagher is WHOI. It's ocean science, ocean coastal science is not WHOI.
Okay.
This one, okay.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the minutes with the corrections as noted?
Yeah, I'll amend my motion to add John's corrective material.
I'll continue to second.
Okay, all those in favor, indicate by
Aye.
saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, thank you. I would like a round of applause for our departing member. Thank you. Thank you. Community service comes with its rewards and its, obligations, and sometimes, once you get deep into it, you're just like, why did I ever do this? But thank you for being here.
No, it's been very rewarding and I've learned a lot. I just,
Oh, we
moving and life things are happening, so I have
No,
to
that's
step
fine.
away from it for a little
That's
while.
okay. We learn from you, too, every time you speak. I would like a motion to continue this meeting until the next time we meet. That's called a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you, thank you.
There's cupcakes over here for Jordan.
Ooh,
You don't have to eat 'em all.
cupcakes.